I was 31 years old, sitting in the parking lot of a Marriott in a wrinkled blazer I'd pulled from the back seat, eating a gas station granola bar, when my phone lit up with a text from my sister. "Where are you? Everyone's already here," Mom's asking. I typed back, 2 minutes. It was more like 10. But that's the thing about family events. They start the moment you're expected, not the moment you arrive. My sister's bridal shower was held in one of those private dining rooms hotels keep for people who think ambiance justifies a corkage fee. Blush balloons. A mimosa tower. Little gold name cards at every seat. She planned it herself, mostly, with help from her fiancé's mother, who had a lot of opinions about linen napkin folds and apparently had nothing else to do with her time. I found my name card. It was at the far end of the table, near the window, next to my aunt and a college friend of my sister's I'd met twice. That placement wasn't an accident. In my family, table proximity is a kind of silent ranking system. My mother sat at the center, next to my sister. My sister's future mother-in-law sat directly across. I was by the window, 12 feet, and a mimosa tower away. That should have been my first clue that the afternoon wasn't going to go the way I'd hoped. I'd driven 4 hours to be there. I'd taken Friday off work, not easy, given what was on my plate, and I'd shown up in the best thing I had in my car, which was not the best look, but it was what it was. I work in tech, and I work constantly, and the honest truth is I hadn't thought about what I was wearing until I was already on the highway. My sister looked beautiful. She always does. She has that quality where events seem to organize themselves around her presence, and people lean in when she talks, and waitstaff refill her glass without being asked. I've spent most of my life being quietly proud of her for that, and quietly aware that I don't have it. Her fiancé, I'll call him what he was to me then, which was just her fiancé, was standing near the mimosa tower when I walked in. He was the kind of man who bought his clothes in sets, and always looked like he'd just come from somewhere important. He sold commercial real estate and liked to explain what commercial real estate was to people who hadn't asked. He was perfectly pleasant in the way that certain people are pleasant when they're performing pleasantness rather than feeling it. He saw me walk in, took in the blazer, the rushed hair, the fact that I was clearly still holding my car keys. He smiled and said, "Did you come straight from the office?" It wasn't a question, it was an observation wrapped in a question, the kind of comment that sounds like small talk, but lands like something else entirely. "Something like that," I said. He laughed, not unkindly, he would probably say, but not kindly either. "You work too much," he said. "That's what your mom tells us. We keep saying someone needs to get that girl a vacation." That girl? I was 31. I let it go. I sat down by the window, talked to my aunt about her garden, ate a small quiche, and watched my sister open presents while her future mother-in-law photographed everything with an iPad. What I didn't say, sitting by that window, was this. I had flown back from a board meeting in Seattle 48 hours earlier. I had spent the previous 6 weeks closing a Series B that our investors had been circling for the better part of a year. We had just signed the term sheet. The number on that term sheet had more zeros than the corkage fee in that hotel dining room by a considerable margin. I didn't say any of that. I ate my quiche. I smiled in the photos. And then my sister's fiancé, pouring himself another mimosa, said to the table generally, not to me specifically, but loud enough, "It's wild to me that some people are married to their jobs and can't even dress for a party, no offense to anyone." He looked at me when he said it. My mother looked at her plate. My sister laughed, a little uncomfortable, and said, "She's busy. She drove 4 hours." "I'm just saying," he said, and shrugged, and smiled again in that performed way. "Priorities are interesting." The table moved on. Someone asked about the honeymoon. The conversation shifted, but I felt it the way you feel a splinter. Not sharp, just present, just there, working its way in. I drove home that evening thinking about priorities. Here's something I've never fully explained to my family, and I want to be honest about why. When I was 24, I tried to get my father to believe in what I was building. I had a prototype, a pitch deck, and a market analysis I'd worked on for 4 months. I sat at the kitchen table with him for 2 hours. He listened, he nodded, and at the end he said, "Sweetheart, I just don't want you to be disappointed." He meant it kindly, I know that. But something happened to me in that moment that I still can't fully articulate. It was like a door closing. Not dramatically, not with a slam, just a soft, definitive click. I decided then that I would build the thing, and I would not talk about building the thing. And eventually, there would just be the thing, and that would be enough. It wasn't a game. It wasn't strategy. It was self-protection. It was the only way I knew how to survive in a family that loved me and did not believe in me simultaneously, which is its own particular kind of loneliness. So yes, my family thought I worked too much. They thought I was chasing something vague and probably not lucrative. My mother had once, gently, suggested I look into whether my company offered a 401k match, as though I were a mid-level analyst at someone else's firm. They didn't know what I had built, and I had let them not know, because knowing had felt too dangerous. I understand now that this was a mistake, but I'm getting ahead of myself. 8 weeks after the bridal shower, I got an email. My assistant flagged it first. She has a system for inbound meeting requests. She filters by whether the contact is warm, cold, or unknown, and she routes unknown ones to a secondary folder unless something about them trips her filter. This one tripped her filter because the company name was one she recognized from a deal we'd passed on 2 years earlier. She forwarded it to me with a note. "This one might be worth a look." Didn't they come up in the Seattle conversation? They had, briefly. They were a mid-sized commercial real estate development firm, regional focus, some residential mixed use. Nothing that had ever been particularly relevant to what we do. But they were trying to expand. They'd been trying to expand for a while, apparently, and they'd recently brought on new backing that wanted them to move faster than their operational infrastructure could support. They needed a technology partner. Specifically, they needed the kind of adaptive logistics platform we'd spent 4 years building. I forwarded the email to my head of partnerships and didn't think much more about it. Then my assistant sent me a follow-up. They're asking for a founder meeting specifically, and they mentioned your name. I looked at the contact name on the email. It was my sister's fiancé's company. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I wrote back and confirmed the meeting. I want to be clear that I did not plan what happened next. I am not someone who engineers situations for dramatic effect. I genuinely don't have the bandwidth. What I had was a meeting on my calendar, a problem that company needed solved, and a platform that could solve it. The rest of it just happened to be true at the same time. He walked into our office on a Tuesday morning. Our office at that point was not what people expect when they think tech, startup. We'd moved out of the co-working space 18 months earlier. We were on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district with actual conference rooms and a front desk and a wall of monitors showing platform activity in real time. We had 63 employees. We had a lobby. He came through the lobby. I watched him on the monitor in my office for a moment before I went out. He was in his usual set-bought suit, with a leather portfolio and the expression of someone who considers himself generally impressive. He was talking to our front desk coordinator, probably asking about parking validation, which is what most visitors ask about, and he looked comfortable, assured, like a man who had been to many offices and found them all more or less equivalent. Then I came through the door. I watched it happen across his face in the span of about 2 seconds. The professional recognition, "She's the founder," they mentioned, followed immediately by the personal recognition, "I know her," followed by the recalibration, followed by something I can only describe as a quiet rearrangement of his entire understanding of the last several months. "Hi," I said. "It's good to see you again." He said my name, just my name, like he was confirming it. "That's me," I said. "Why don't we go to the conference room?" The meeting itself was professional. I want to be clear about that too. I brought in my head of partnerships and our technical lead, and we ran it the way we run every meeting, structured, efficient, focused on the problem and whether we were the right solution for it. He had two people with him, both of whom were clearly competent and clearly had no idea that the founder and the founder's sister's future brother-in-law were sitting across the table from each other. He was good in the meeting, actually. He knew his business and he knew what they needed, and underneath the performed confidence there was a genuine problem he was trying to solve. I respected that. But there was a moment, maybe 40 minutes in, when we were walking through a pricing structure, when he looked up from the papers and said, quietly, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "She never." "I know," I said. His colleagues looked between us, slightly confused. We moved on. At the end of the meeting, when his team had stepped out to take calls, he stayed behind. He stood at the window, the one that looks out over the financial district. The one I'd specifically asked for when we signed the lease because I'd always wanted a window like that, and now I had one. And he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." "Yes," I said. "The bridal shower," what I said. "And other things," I said. "But yes." He turned from the window. He looked like a man who had spent a lot of years being the most important person in his own story and had just discovered that the story had other characters. "I'm sorry," he said, and I think he meant it. People often do, once the cost of not meaning it becomes apparent. "Thank you," I said. "I didn't take the deal." This is the part I have to explain carefully because I've been asked about it since, and the reasons are more complicated than they probably look from the outside. It wasn't about the bridal shower comment. I want to be honest. If that had been the only thing, I probably would have moved forward. Business is business, and I have worked with people I liked far less than my sister's fiancé. It was about what I learned during due diligence. When our partnerships team ran their standard background process, as we do with every potential client, they found some things, not illegal things, but things that told a story about how that company operated, about the corners they cut and the commitments they didn't keep, and the pattern of behavior that showed up consistently across 3 former vendors and 2 ex-employees. The kind of things that don't make headlines but do make partnerships expensive and exhausting. I passed. I wrote the email myself. I kept it professional and I kept it brief, and I said we weren't the right fit at this stage, and I wished them well with their expansion. He called the day he got it. I didn't pick up. He texted that evening, something about wanting to understand the decision, something about having hoped we could work through any concerns. I didn't respond. My sister called me the following Sunday. She'd heard, somehow, probably from him, that I'd passed on the deal. She didn't know the details. She wanted to know if it was because of the thing at the shower, which is what she called it, the thing at the shower. I told her it wasn't. I told her it was a business decision and it was made on business grounds. That was true. But then she said something that I've thought about every week since. She said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I said, "Tell you what?" She said, "Any of it. The company, the funding, any of it. Mom thinks you work at a software firm. She was asking me last month if you were doing okay financially. She wanted to know if we should chip in for your portion of Grandma's trip." I didn't say anything. She said, "Why didn't you tell us?" And I said, "Finally, because you never asked." That wasn't entirely fair. I know that. She had asked. She'd asked how work was, whether I was stressed, whether I was taking care of myself. Those are asking, but they're not the same as believing, and somewhere in my head I had confused the two. We were on the phone for almost 2 hours that night. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years. She cried a little. I cried a little. She told me that she had always been proud of me, that she'd just never known what she was proud of exactly, which made me laugh in the complicated way that things make you laugh when they're also a little devastating. She asked me what the company was worth. I told her. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Oh my God." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Mom is going to, I can't even." I know. She asked me to come home for her mother-in-law's birthday dinner in the spring and to maybe, this time, dress appropriately, and I said I would try. The wedding was in October. It was held at a vineyard outside the city, the kind of place where everything is the right shade of cream and the food is genuinely excellent. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, green silk. Simple. The kind of thing that photographs well without trying too hard. Her fiancé, her husband now, shook my hand at the reception. He was warm and he was appropriate, and there was nothing in his manner that wasn't sincere, as far as I could tell. I think the bridal shower version of him was real, and the apology version was also real, and the wedding version was real too. People are usually more than one thing. I've been more than one thing. We had a normal conversation about nothing important. He recommended a wine, and it was a good recommendation, and I thanked him for it. That was that. My mother found me near the end of the evening, when the dance floor had thinned out and the cream-colored lights had that soft, late-night quality. She said, "Your sister told me about the company." I said, "She wasn't supposed to yet." She said, "No," I asked her. I made her tell me. She paused. "Why didn't you say anything?" I said, "I tried once. You don't remember." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry I didn't listen." That was the closest my mother had ever come to that kind of apology in my entire life. I stood there on the edge of a vineyard dance floor in a green silk dress, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it mostly. "Is it?" she said. "It's getting there," I said. She hugged me then, the kind of hug that doesn't feel like performance. We stood there for a moment while the DJ played something from the 90s, and my sister danced badly and happily with her new husband somewhere across the room. I stayed until the end. I helped clean up the centerpieces. I drove home with the windows down, the October air cold and clean, thinking that some things take a long time to arrive at, but do eventually arrive. I didn't know what my family had thought I was for the better part of a decade. Struggling, probably. Chasing something that wasn't coming. Running hard in a direction they couldn't see. I had let them think that because I didn't know how else to protect myself. I'm still not sure I made the right call, but I'm starting to think the answer to that question matters less than I used to think it did. What matters is the window on the 14th floor that I asked for, specifically because I'd always wanted one. What matters is my sister, who called me last week just to check in, which she'd never really done before. What matters is my mother's hug at the edge of a vineyard, which I've been waiting for, in one way or another, for most of my adult life. That's enough. For now, that's enough. I've thought a lot about the parking lot outside that Marriott, the granola bar, the wrinkled blazer, the way I sat in the car for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I used to think I was just tired that day. But I think now I was carrying something heavier than tired. The particular weight of being loved by people who had already decided what you were. And the question I keep coming back to is, how much of that was their fault and how much of it was mine? Because here's what I know. My sister's fiancé said something dismissive at a party, and it stung, and he was wrong. But he was only able to say it because I had spent years giving everyone around me a blank space where the truth should have been. I had chosen silence as armor, and silence looks a lot like emptiness from the outside. You can't fault people entirely for filling that space with their own assumptions when you never gave them anything else to work with. That's the part I had to sit with after everything settled, not the vindication. The vindication came and went faster than I expected. But the question of what I had actually done to the people I loved by keeping them out. My mother wanting to chip in for my portion of a trip, my sister not knowing what she was proud of. Those weren't just their failures of curiosity. They were the direct result of a wall I had built and then wondered why no one could see through. There's a version of this story where I'm purely the wrong party. I've seen it in my head. It's satisfying for about 5 minutes. But the honest version is messier and more useful. The honest version is that building something real, something that holds, something that lasts, requires more than just doing the work quietly in a room. It requires the courage to let people see what you're building before it's finished, before it's safe, before you know for certain it's going to work. That's the part I got wrong for a long time. I had the discipline to build, I did not have the courage to be seen while building. And the discipline without the courage is incomplete. I know that now. The late nights, the term sheets, the 63 employees, the 14th floor window, none of it meant what it could have meant to the people who loved me. Because I had kept it entirely separate from them. I had earned something and then locked it in a room they weren't allowed to enter. My mother's hug at the edge of that vineyard was real. My sister calling just to check in is real. Those things exist now because eventually, finally, I let the wall come down. Not because I planned it, not because someone forced it, but because a man walked into my lobby and rearranged the story in a way I couldn't control. And the truth just came out on its own, the way truth usually does when you've been holding it long enough. I think about the woman I was at 24, sitting at that kitchen table with my pitch deck, watching my father's face as he tried to be kind about not believing. I wish I could go back and tell her, the work is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also have to show up. You have to let yourself be known, even when it's terrifying, even when the people you love might get it wrong. That's what I'm still learning, probably always will be. The window on the 14th floor is still there. It's enough. But so is a phone call from my sister on a Tuesday afternoon about nothing in particular. I spent a decade thinking those two things were in competition with each other. They were never in competition. I just hadn't figured out how to hold them both yet.